Welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Parimala Kulkarni. I teach in the Department of English, Osmania University, Hyderabad. This module is on Grace Nichols, which is part of the poetry unit in the paper African and Caribbean Writing in English. In this module, we will talk about the Guyanese British poet Grace Nichols. We will take a look at her major works, discuss some of her major themes and concerns, and also take a look at her style. Then we will look at some poems from her two poetry collections. One is called I is a Long-Memoried Woman, and the second collection called The Fat Black Woman's Poems. And finally, we will take a look at the critical reception accorded to Grace Nichols. Grace Nichols is a Guyanese British poet. She is also a very popular children's writer. She also has a novel to her credit. It is important to read her work in order to understand the British-Caribbean connection, the cultural connection, because her work is full of eclectic references to different cultures, the Caribbean, the Amerindian, the British, etc. Grace Nichols focuses on the life of a Caribbean woman as a migrant in Britain. This is her central concern in many of her works. Now let us take a brief look at the life of Grace Nichols. Nichols was born in 1950 in Guyana. She grew up in a small village. Later, she shifted to the urban area and she joined the University of Guyana. After her education, she worked as a teacher as well as a journalist. When she was a journalist, she did a lot of traveling and she became interested in the local myths and traditions. She took a great interest in finding out the tales of the Amerindian myths, the Caribbean myths, traditions, oral culture, stories, etc. And in 1977, Grace Nichols immigrated to England with her partner and poet named John Agard. Now let us take a look at Nichols' works. She has several poetry collections to her credit. Her first poetry collection, called I is a Long-Memoried Woman, was published in 1983. It won the Commonwealth Poetry Prize. Her second collection of poems, known as The Fat Black Woman's Poems, published in 1984, and Lazy Thoughts of a Lazy Woman, published in 1989, talk about the black woman in Britain. Her poetry collection Sunrise, published in 1996, combines the themes of history and memory. Her next poetry collection, Picasso, I Want My Face Back, published in 2009, is in the voice of Dora Maar, who was the muse and mistress of Picasso. Besides, she has several other poetry collections. Apart from this, she has a number of books written for children. Her books for children are very, very popular. Let us take a look at some of the books she has written for children. Come On Into My Tropical Garden, published in 1988, became a very popular work among children. She has other books like Give Yourself a Hug, Startling the Flying Fish, which was published with her partner John Agard. And then she has her collection No Hickory, No Dickory, No Dock, a collection of Caribbean nursery rhymes, published in 1991. All these children's works are influenced by the folklore from the Caribbean, the African, and the Native American cultures. Besides these, she also has a novel named Whole of a Morning Sky, published in 1986. Now let us turn to some of the major themes and concerns in Grace Nichols' poetry. We will begin by looking at the major themes. One of the major themes that pervades her books is where Nichols explores the legacy of double colonization of black women in a post-colonial community. Here, she is concerned about the black woman as doubly colonized in the sense, one as a woman, the other as a black woman. So, she faces marginalization in terms of gender and race. That is a major concern seen throughout her works. Nichols' poetry challenges the stereotyped notions of black women. She questions the negative stereotypes perpetuated by the racist and patriarchal cultures. What is important about Grace Nichols is she refuses to look at black women as merely victims. It is her main concern to portray women as self-assertive individuals with a lot of potential. She gives them a voice and agency. She gives them a subjectivity. While Nichols celebrates the identity of the black woman, but she refuses to see the black woman as a monolithic construction. She is very careful in bringing in the diverse cultural and historical factors in portraying the black woman. So, Grace Nichols resists the essentializing racial or gendered identity. In one of her poems called, of course, when they ask for poems about the realities of black women, she has this to say. She says, I can say, I can write no poem big enough to hold the essence of a black woman or a white woman or a green woman. So, Nichols does not believe in an essential womanhood. She recognizes the diversity of the cultural forces in a woman's life. Besides this, home, exile, migration, identity, which are major post-colonial preoccupations, are central to Nichols' work. Nichols articulates the British Caribbean perspectives on origins, place, power, subjectivity, language, and the boundaries that define them. One remarkable feature about Grace Nichols is the skill with which she infuses the standard English with Creole. For this, she has been compared with Kamau Brathwaite and Louise Bennett, who are known for having used the Creole very effectively. However, Nichols uses Creoles to express a variety of moods and themes. Now let us look at her poetry collection, I Is a Long-Memoried Woman. This was her debut poetry collection, which won the Commonwealth Poetry Prize, as I mentioned earlier. This has been made into a radio drama. This has also been adapted into a film and has won several awards. I Is a Long-Memoried Woman explores the history of slavery from a female perspective. It can be said to be a her story, not history, but a her story. In this, the black slave woman remembers the Caribbean women's histories. She reconstructs the African woman's sense of self, which has been damaged by slavery in two ways. First is by recovering the cultural links with Africa, and the second by reclaiming the female body as the basis of power for women. So, in this collection, we see the African woman seeking her identity and seeking freedom in order to overcome oppression. The book I is a Long-Memoried Woman is divided into 5 sections. Let me read out the section names for you. The first section is called The Beginning. Second, The Vicissitudes. Third, The Sorcery. Fourth, The Bloodling. And fifth, The Return. Now, each of these sections explore a different facet of slavery and a different stage in the slave woman's life. This book has been seen as a parallel to Brathwaite's trilogy, The Arrivants and the Mother Poem. This is structured chronologically from capture in Africa to emancipation after revolt. That is, from the time the African slave was captured in America, taken in ships across the seas and planted in the New World. It traces the journey of the African slave woman. So, the book deals with the cultural uprooting to the recreation of a new individual and collective Caribbean identity. It's very interesting to see here that the slave woman does not say I am. She says I is, which is challenging the established notions of language. She does not say I am, she says I is. So, structurally also, the collection challenges many established notions of history, language, and many other institutions. So, the slave woman here is somebody who resists and rebels and offers resistance to the oppression. She does not silently accept victimization. She refuses oppression. She defies domination, and she is full of self-assertion and self-determination, which is a significant thing about Nichols' work. This work has been considered, as I mentioned earlier, as a parallel to Brathwaite's Arrivants, wherein Brathwaite has concentrated on only the male perspective of the history of African slavery. Nichols brings in the female perspective, slavery seen from a woman's point of view, and the contribution of the black woman in the revolt against slavery. Now, let us discuss one of the poems from this collection, which is called One Continent to Another. This is the opening poem in the first section called The Beginning. In this collection, I is a Long-Memoried Woman. From one continent to another is the journey of the African slave woman from Africa to the New World. This poem narrates the story of a slave woman's uprooting from her home, the horrifying and the brutal journey of the Middle Passage, and her arrival in a hostile world, and later her rebirth after the death in slavery. The Middle Passage refers to the transportation of millions of Africans to New World as part of the Atlantic slave trade. Now let us take a look at a few lines of the poem. Nichols says, "Child of the Middle Passage womb, push. Daughter of a vengeful Kai, she came into the New World, birth aching her pain, from one continent to another, mourning, her belly cry sounding the wind." Now notice the imagery used in these lines. The imagery is that of a childbirth, how painful the childbirth can be. So the journey from Africa to the Caribbean is being compared to the childbirth, where the child is brought into a new world, but the woman who is giving birth experiences extreme pain and trauma to give birth to this new life. So it's very symbolic here that Nichols uses the very imagery of childbirth to indicate the arriving of the African slave woman from Africa into the Caribbean, but being born with a new identity after the slavery. However, her bitter struggles cannot stop her journey to a new life. And towards the end, the slave woman rejects victimhood, asserts her identity, and creates a new identity for herself. So the poem concludes on a note of hope. Let us listen to Grace Nichols herself reciting the lines, "But being a woman, she moved again, knew it was the black beginning, though everything said it was the end." So that was Grace Nichols reciting her own lines. Nichols in this poem illustrates the ability of women to recover something from nothing. She says, "Now she stoops in green cane fields, piecing the life she would lead." So in this poem we see that Nichols gives voice to female agency, female activity, and a new subjectivity. You find the birth of a new woman who refuses to be a victim and who is hopeful of making a new life for herself. The treatment of time and space are central to this collection of poems in I is a Long-Memoried Woman. Here, Nichols talks about the passage of slaves and later migrants moving from one continent to another. It indicates a transition both in space and time, and it relates the past to the present. It describes the experience of the slave as a movement from the past, bleeding memories in the darkness, to the future of piecing the life she would lead. Besides the importance of time and space here, personal and collective memory is also crucial to this collection. So Nichols relates the past experience of slavery to the contemporary experience of migration to Britain. Nichols relates, connects the traumatic experience of slavery, which was also an uprooting from one place to the other. She compares it to the migratory experience where people migrate to different countries in the contemporary globalized world. So for Nichols, there is a close connection between these two experiences. So the personal also becomes the collective memory. She also narrates the experience of forced migration of the slaves in the Middle Passage womb, which gives birth to a new world self. Thus, we see here that personal and collective memory becomes very important in this collection of poems. Next, we move on to her second collection of poems called The Fat Black Woman's Poems. Now, this is one of Nichols' very popular anthologies of poems in which Nichols moves from the historical past to the present time. In this collection, Nichols introduces a black Caribbean immigrant in contemporary Britain, and the collection of poems narrate the experiences of the immigrant in Britain. This collection critiques and challenges the European normative beauty, that is white, slim, blue-eyed and blonde concept. It's very interesting that these poems are in a very playful tone. Look at the title, The Fat Black Woman. The title evokes three social stereotypes. That is of being fat, being black, and being a woman. So, the black woman is marginalized in terms of race, in terms of gender, and also in terms of size. But however, it's interesting to note that the fat black woman redefines beauty. She redefines the concept of beauty. In fact, she does not even define it. She says, beauty is a fat black woman. Beauty is a fat black woman. That's how she defines beauty. Therefore, in this collection, Nichols dismantles the stereotypes and images about black women. Now let us take a look at a very, very interesting poem known as The Fat Black Woman Goes Shopping. This is a poem which is very funny and it's also fun. This narrates the experiences of a fat black woman who goes shopping in contemporary Britain. This poem draws attention to the ideals of beauty which are oppressive to a fat black woman. In this poem, we have the fat black woman coming to a shop to buy some clothes. However, she is very disappointed at the attitude of the sales girls as well as the lack of the size required for her. So, the fat black woman is a national, a cultural as well as a physical outsider. She is received very coldly by the salesperson in the shop. This coldness is also representative of the attitude met by the migrants to England. In this poem, the sales girls are described as thin and slender, representing the normative Western concept of beauty as thin as beautiful. So the poem highlights the anti-fat bias because there are no suitable dresses for a woman who is fat. However, what is important to note is that the fat black woman is unperturbed, is undisturbed. She is not ruffled by this. In fact, she challenges the desirability of universal slimness and she critiques the fashion industry for imposing slimness on a female body. And all this is done in a very, very mischievous manner. So, we looked at very briefly The Fat Black Woman Goes Shopping, where the fat black woman looks for clothes suitable for her, but she's extremely disappointed that she does not find anything that is suitable for her. And in fact, she is met by very cold and unfriendly stares in the shop. Now we look at one more poem. This is a poem which has a very long title. Let me read it out for you. This poem is called Thoughts Drifting Through the Fat Black Woman's Head While Having a Full Bubble Bath. This poem is one of the very, very popular poems in this anthology. Now, this poem challenges the Western and Caribbean male traditions and black women's writing that portrays black women chiefly as victims of white male patriarchy. In this poem, the fat black woman confronts the discourses of anthropology, history, theology, and consumer capitalism which relegated and continue to relegate black women to the margins. Let me read out a bit from this poem. Steatopygus sky, steatopygus sea, steatopygus waves, steatopygus me. Oh, how I long to place my foot on the head of anthropology, to swing my breasts in the face of history, to scrub my back with the dogma of theology, to put my soap in the slimming industry's profitsome spoke. Steatopygus sky, steatopygus sea, steatopygus waves, steatopygus me. So if you notice in the poem, there is one word which is repeated, that is steatopygus. Let me elaborate a bit on this. Now, Nichols appropriates a scientific term, steatopygia, which was defined as a racial deformation and which was used to categorize African women as subhuman and hypersexual. Steatopygia means accumulation of fat on the buttocks. So this term was appropriated and used to insult black women. But notice how Nichols appropriates this term in order to challenge the established notions of anthropology, history, culture, as well as concepts of beauty. The poem is in extremely humorous tone, but it offers a serious challenge to the gendered views of science, religion, history, etc. So far, we briefly looked at some of the poems of Grace Nichols from her two poetry collections. Now let us look at the critical reception to Nichols' works. Her works have been received very favorably. She is a very popular poet in Britain and outside. She is known for her poetic craft, her musical poetry, but all this is combined with political undertones. Though she has written seemingly innocent and humorous poems like The Fat Black Woman Goes Shopping, but they offer a challenge to established notions of race, gender, and culture. Nichols in her work promotes the cause of black women's self-worth, recognition, multiplicity, and resiliency. It is important to remember that Nichols prefers the term transcultural writer than just a post-colonial poet, because she believes in the diversity of cultures and she recognizes that diverse cultures have contributed to her poetic craft. Her poetry is deeply informed by a Caribbean sensibility, but influenced by different immigrant groups in the Caribbean, the East Indians, the Chinese, and Portuguese. Nichols has won several prizes and awards for her work. She has been a poet in residence at the Tate Gallery, London. She is very popular on the current GCSE syllabus in the United Kingdom. So, Grace Nichols' poetry has been well received. She is a very popular poet among school children. She has written a lot of poems for school children. She is invited to various schools for poetry recitations. So in this module, we have discussed Grace Nichols, who is a Guyanese British poet. She is also a children's writer and a novelist. We have looked at the major themes in her work, that is home, exile, immigration, and identity. We also saw how Nichols very skillfully interweaves Creole with Standard English. We also discussed her first poetry collection, I is a Long-Memoried Woman, and also two poems from her second poetry collection, The Fat Black Woman. We saw how Grace Nichols brings the experiences of the black woman from the times of slavery to the contemporary times, and also focuses on the Caribbean immigrant woman's experiences in today's United Kingdom. Hope you gained some insights into Grace Nichols' poetry from this module. Thank you.